No questions? Please note, this is not an endorsement of Pepsi products. Okay? I'm too old to acquire any motor skills, so this is not going to do any damage. But you are different. You have your whole life in front of you. Alright? Do you have any questions? Last week, I received this email from Dan Murphy. And so I posted the entire email here. Right? You can take time to read it, but essentially it gives you some very, very important tips on interviewing. Dan graduated in 2004. I think it was 2004. He went to work for UPS as a programmer for about 2 years. Co-op for 6 months, and then programmer for 2 years. And then he stopped programming. He went to work for a recruiting company for about 2 years. And after that, he went to work for IGNU, which is a company founded by 3 CIS students. And so he's their main sales person. And the company has been growing by leaps and bounds, something like 300% a year in terms of revenue. Last summer I was there, their company took up about, the Cube building at Shelbyville and Osman Lane. They're in that building, the 17th floor, something like that. And they occupy about half the floor. This year, I think, they not only will take up the entire floor, but they have to acquire another floor. That's how fast they're growing. They're printing money. And so he has a lot of experience placing people, interviewing people, and I would like you to read it very, very carefully. Particularly, this, he tells me how he interviews people. When he interviews people, he asks the people being interviewed to give them a problem, all right, and a machine, and they ask them to come up with a solution. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they have to show. Sometimes they'll write some if statements on the board and see how you handle that, or they will give you a problem and say, design a relational database. All right? You can't go say, I'm going to open my book and look. No. You cannot go on the internet. But it's not difficult problems. It's just that you have to, that's why I'm conducting the class the way I've been conducting my classes. All right? I want you to be able to recall. You're going to know it so well that you can recall all the little details. All right? So you are actually much better than what your test scores are going to show. Okay? That's what's going to happen in this class. And so you're going to be thankful, I think, later on in life. When you interview, when you talk to people, anybody can talk about things, right? But very few people can do it. And that's the kind of students, graduates we want to produce. We want to produce people that can actually do it. Okay. So, you don't have any questions? Nope. Okay. In that case, we will continue with Chapter 3. And after Chapter 3, oh, by the way, you know that you're entitled to all the Microsoft software for free, right? Okay. If you don't know that, please don't pay for Microsoft products. Microsoft has a contract with us so that all of our CIS students, if you're not taking CIS classes or non-CIS students, you're not entitled to the software. So, for example, if you are a KNS student, you can't get access to the software. So, it is very important that you know that and don't pay for anything. Unless, of course, you have a special fondness for Bill Gates.
One question. What chapters are going to be covered on the first test?
When is the first test? Good question.
The 15th.
15th, which is coming up very soon, right? It's next week, right? Next Wednesday? All right, next Wednesday. It's going to be chapters 1 through 3. Chapters 1 through 3. Monday, I'm going to give you a brief review. Or Wednesday. Monday or Wednesday. We'll give you a brief review. And when should you start studying for the test? Right? You want the precise moment. It's when the game was decided with that catch last night. That's when you should have started preparing for the test. Yes.
And will it be on paper or will it be in the computer lab?
It's going to be here.
Okay.
It's close everything. Notes, books, laptop, smartphones. If you have an old phone, you cannot have it keep it open. But smartphones are closed. Everything's closed. No calculator either. Okay. You can have pencils. If you write with a pen, you could, but I strongly suggest that you write with pencils so you can erase your answers. You want to change your answers if need be. And you need to know the materials really, really well so that you have just, I'll set up the test so you just have enough time to finish the test. Okay. The idea is to make sure that you know the stuff well. I want you to know the stuff really well. Okay. So that you can order drinks using these concepts. Like Coke. Any other questions? I'm going to post a review guide which has bullet points, and so that you can at least know the areas that are going to be stressed on the test. And I'll go over that also on Wednesday, on Monday at the latest. But it's Wednesday. So please take it seriously. And this is going to be the easiest of the 3 tests. So it is most likely for you to score high, and still you want to score high. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Stop by the office, send me emails if you have any questions for you. But please, you cannot cram stuff like this. Okay? You also hands-on stuff. There's going to be lots of hands-on stuff. So you're going to be able to draw diagrams to change things. I'll talk more about it. Okay? A great question. Again, thank you for asking the question. Any other questions? So we're going to continue with Chapter 3. And today, it is very likely that we'll get into Chapter 4. And Chapter 4 is on modeling, and then Chapter 5, I think, maybe on SQL. We went through this in class last week, and remember we created our own examples, but the same tables. If you take a look at the customer table, you can see that there is a customer, Smithson, with 421 as the agent, and 421 doesn't exist, right? So in that sense, this is not really a good example, because if this was a real relational database, 421 wouldn't have got into the customer table at all, right? Because you know that there's referential integrity. So if you enforce referential integrity, and when you try to enter a value of the foreign key that doesn't already exist in the primary key table, which in this case is the agent table, you get an error message, right? Did you all experience that? You probably did in Access. So please keep that in mind as we go through the examples. And this is the product And what we want to do is to do a join. And there are 3 steps to a join. The first step is the product. And a product, if you recall, is all the possible combinations of the rows of the 2 tables, right? So the first table contains 5 rows, and the second table contains 2 rows. The product would be what? 10 rows, right? And if the first table contains 50 million rows and the second table contains 5 million rows, it's a lot, right? I've written applications doing joins with that many rows in the tables of 5. 2 days, that's how long it would take in my case, 2 days. I was running Oracle on Windows servers. And at the end of the month closed, we would have to join all the records, run through them. So they typically consume a lot of resources. So that's why you want fast servers. Database servers typically consume a lot of resources. So this is the product. There's no need for you to verify everything here, of course, because we did that last week when we drew everything the process. That's what you have to do on the test, all right? I'm going to give you 2 tables and say, please find the natural join of these 2 tables and show every step. By that I mean show the product, right, which is this step. And then the second step is the select. You're going to show the select. And select, of course, is a step where you only keep those rows where the agent code from the customer table is equal to the agent code from the agent table. As you can see, right, the columns in the middle. Right? Customer.agent code and agent.agent code. So those are the matching rows. So those rows are kept. That's select. And project is, of course, to eliminate the redundant column, which is either agent code from the agent table or the agent code from the customer, because in that case, they're redundant. So that's that test question, and there will be a question like that. And how do you prepare for that? By going through a couple of examples yourself. You go through this example or the example that I have for the class. So we'll just pick an example from the book or from. You have to do it, all right? You can't just look at the example and think, I'll review like that by reading, by looking at the example. You have to actually write it down through the steps. That's when holes or weaknesses in your understanding or knowledge will be shown, come up. Any questions about this? Very good. Now, those 2 tables are given on what page? Can someone tell me what page? Louder, please.
72.
72, thank you. The customer and agent tables that we used initially. All right, so take a look at those 2 tables. We're going to introduce these 2 concepts very, very briefly today. They are not going to be on the test. They are not going to be on the test. All right? But I want to introduce these 2, left outer join and right outer join. I want to talk about them in that I want to just plant some ideas in your mind so that later on when we actually do it in chapter 6 or 7, we will come back and revisit the concepts. Sometimes you may have a situation where there are customers without an agent or an agent without a customer. Okay? And those situations may exist, right? And so if you do a natural join, please note, if you do a natural join, those customers without an agent, will they be in the result?
No. Because codes will match the agent code.
Do you think Daniel is correct, right? You agree with Daniel? He doesn't look at it as much as you do. Just do it. I did see him a couple of times in the gym.
She wanted to meet last weekend. But
I should have. Right. So, but Daniel is right. You're not going to see in the natural joint, you're not going to see the customers who do not have an agent. You're not going to see that. And the reason, as Daniel said, is because in the natural joint process, you have a select step. And in that step, you only retain rows that have matching agent codes, right? But customers who do not have an agent code will not be matched with any of the agents. Right? You all understand that, right? So that's where this may become useful. In other words, if you want to find a listing of all the customers and agents, whether or not the customer have an agent, then you can do a customer left join agent. Similarly, if you want to find all the agents, whether or not the agents already have a customer, you can do a customer right join agent. Now, the details of which we're not going to talk about today, but just so that you know that there are ways to also include agents or customers that are not matched. Right? Those what these two outer joins are for. But natural join, you should know really, really well. Divide. Divide is a very useful application. Divide is an operation that returns rows in the first table that are associated with every row in the second table. Okay? So if you can, in this case, 5 is returned because, as you can see, in the first row, 5 is associated with A in the first table, and then 5 is associated with B in the fourth. Yeah, it's the fourth row. Right? So the only value that's associated with A and B in the first table is 5. And that's why 5 is returned. Okay, that's how divide is defined. And divide can be very useful in that you can say if you have if you divide the sales table by the product table, what do you think will be returned in this case? Why?
because one order the only one with this criteria has one product ID, two product ID, three product ID, four product ID.
Okay. So 111 is the salesperson who has sold all the products, right? So that's much easier to understand when you have an actual application. So sometimes you may have sets of data like this. So it gives you the sales, right, of products. There may be a quantity involved, right? But we're keeping it simple. Say, if I want a list of the agents who have sold every single one of the products, it's identifying who the strong salespeople are. So, for example, you can use 5. Okay. If I were to add another product, say product 5, to the product table, what would be the result?
Yeah. Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing.
Wouldn't return a result because none of the salesperson have sold all of the products.
Nothing is correct, right? Nothing is correct, but even a better way of saying that is that the result returned will be the empty table, right? Or the null set. But you're right. Any question about this? This is metadata. If you recall, we mentioned metadata earlier in chapter 2. Metadata is data about data, for example, data types, column names, and so on and so forth, but also relationships, such as which table is related to which other table, or which tables are related to other tables. And so the information is mostly contained in system catalogs. This is beyond the scope of this class to get into that area. But in your, you can explore. You have access to metadata of your own databases. For those of you who have created databases or tables already in your account, you can look at the system tables and just look at them numerous. And so you can look at them to see what the system table contains. Information, metadata about your table. And that's just a simple example of a data dictionary. And every database server, database management system, of course, does it slightly differently. So that's why you want people with Oracle experience and SQL Server experience. So we have talked about relational algebra. We have also talked about database modeling, very informally. And we have mentioned that there are 3 types of relationships: one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-many, right? And here, one-many relationship is the most common type, and you see lots of them in a relational database. One-to-one is less often, but it happens, right? Like department chair, department, that relationship, or faculty and department, and the relationship is department chair. We gave that as an example, right? One-to-one. So it does occur. And many relationships, of course, are also very, very often, very common, I should say. But when you implement the many relationship in the relational database, you always convert it into 2 one-many relationships, right? So if I gave you a many relationship, or gave you a statement on the test and say, please define a relationship to describe that would capture the description, all right? That would reflect the business rule given in the description. Then you would come up with a many relationship, and I would say if the relationship's many, you should first of all represent it as many, and then convert it into 2 one-many relationships. The only professor in the USA that gives you the test questions before the test. The only professor. Just give you 2 questions today. All right. This is, of course, VCO. And you have, sure you have grown to like VCO in the past week or so. And this is a one-many relationship, and you describe a one-many relationship as you will on this test next Wednesday. You're going to describe it both ways for the description, for the business rule to be complete. You're going to say, in this case, the painter may paint one or many paintings, and each painting is painted by one painter, but only one painter. That will be an example of a business rule. If you were asked to provide a business rule for a relational diagram or ERD, then that's what you do. Is that clear? I'm actually doing the review, positive at least, but I said I was going to do it on Wednesday and Monday. Questions? I hope everybody gets 100%. Here's just the actual database itself. Do you find anything out there that's offensive? Okay, so by the time of the test, if you see something like this, it should be very obvious to you as to what kind of business rule is being conveyed and how you may explain everything. For example, I may ask you, how do you, what change would you have to make in this example so that referential integrity is violated? Let's do that. Okay? Let's do that. Kevin, what change would you have to make to violate referential integrity? Yeah. We all understand that you didn't start the review last night. So I want to be very specific. What value, in which row, in which table, that you would change to what to violate referential integrity?
Change pager number 1, 2, 3.
To what? Did you say change to 1 to 6? Do you agree? Why not?
And then just make the painter responsible for the painting.
That would be plagiarism, right?
Yeah.
But to violate referential integrity. No, it doesn't. Changing it to 1 to 6 doesn't violate referential integrity. What do you think?
If you change it to 1, 2, 4, if you change painter number 1, 2, 3 to any number other than 1, 2, 6, 1, 2, 3,
Why?
because you have in the painting table, you have reference to a painter number that's not in the painter table.
So that's correct, right? That's correct. Not you, Kevin, you're wrong. They're correct because referential integrity says the foreign key values may be null. Right? May be null. So none of them is null, right? But if they are not null, they have to be an existing value in the parent table, which in this case is the painter table. Right? Yes.
So if you change it to 1, 2, 6, why wouldn't it violate referential
It would
integrity?
not. 1 to 6 is just, it's an existing value.
Yeah, but it does say 1, 2, 3, so there would still be referencing something that's there.
Yeah, it doesn't violate referential integrity if you change 1 to 3 to 1 to 6.
References still valid.
Yeah, the
Well,
references are still good.
Well, no, they're not, because there's no 1, 2, 3 anymore.
No, I'm saying here. If you change 1 to 3 to 1 to 6.
Oh, I was
here.
talking about changing the
Yes.
top. Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's another way to do that. But if you were to change 1 to 3 to say 1 to 4, then yes, you would introduce referential integrity violation as well, right? Then all of a sudden these values would be referring to a non-existing primary key value in the painter, right? But that's not as good an example as changing one of these, because usually you would not be able to do that. Yeah.
So in the painting table, you said you can't have null values in painting num.
Say it again.
You said you can have null values in painter num.
In the painting table? In the painting table, as far as referential integrity is concerned, you may have a null value. Okay, simply to indicate in the painting table, if that's null, simply it's an unknown painter. For example, right, to indicate it's an unknown painter. So you may have one, but the specific business rule in this case says you have to have one. You see, there's no optional sign in the drawing, right? If you go back to the book, it says you have to have a painter for each painting. It's one, right? Yeah.
To put a null value in there, would you just write the word null, or?
No, you can say null, or you can just don't enter anything. Yeah, then it would be null. But in this particular case, no.
Right.
The business rule says the painting has to be painted by one and one painter only. If you recall, we went through the business rule, right? So those are little details that you really wouldn't truly understand unless you do a few examples yourself. Yes?
So let's say that it wasn't mandatory, it was optional on the table.
Then it may be that it's null.
In Painter, would you have to have null, but you can't
Painter,
have null
no,
in the primary key?
No. In Painter, you may not. Only foreign key value may be null.
So how would like the database react to that if you didn't have anything listed in the, like the Painter table and the primary key, anything listed as null?
The primary key values may not be null.
Right.
Okay. But you may have a null value in the child table, which is painting. All right. Even though, but that's a special value that's allowed in the foreign key field to indicate that the foreign key value is not known. But you may not have a null in the foreign key field, such as painter number in the painter table. So what table you're talking about is important. Yeah. So painter number appears in both painter and painting, right? When it's in painter, it's a primary key value. When it's in painting, it's a foreign key value. It may be null in painting, but it may not be null in painter. Answer the question, I think. Okay. So you must be happy. You're a Giants fan?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what your cat says. Any questions? One-to-one relationship, and it's not as common, and this is the example we gave, and this is what it shows, professor department. And as you can see, in this relationship, you have a one-to-one relationship, and one-to-many relationship is much more common, and it's usually implemented with a composite entity or bridge entity or third entity, as they are called sometimes. And student and class, in this case, this is a many-many relationship because the student may take many classes and the class may be taken by many students. And here's an example. So we have enrollment, or enroll, that's the name of the bridge table. And so this really, it's a simple yet very powerful solution, right? So you may add to the number of enrollments without changing the structure of either one of the tables. We call relational database as relative structural independence. That's what we meant. And you can add as many enrollments up to an upper limit. So that's just the example we're talking about, and you always introduce a third table. Always. And this is the expanded ERD. It has 4 tables. And this is what it would look like in Access. And data redundancy revisited. Remember in Chapter 1, we said that data redundancy is the root of all evil. It still is, except that sometimes you have to have some necessary evil, right? And necessary evil is, of course, the repetition of the primary key value in a foreign key table. That's the necessary redundancy. Questions? Discussion? Very good. Only a few people have signed up for the boot camp, and I think if you want to do it next year, that's fine. But if you could do it this year, I would do it this year. Met a guy last night. He was looking for, the company was looking for. He wants 4 Java programmers. I said, I don't have any to give you. He said, I can raise the pay. I said, I don't have any to give you. We have a lot of people that can talk about they can name things, but very few people that can do it. There's always this myth about programming being exported to India. It is the biggest lie that you can tell. I mean, second biggest lie. The first biggest lie, we know what it is, right? I told you. Don't recall? U.S. public schools have been lying to you, right? They said learning is fun. You think learning is fun? It's torture. It's pure torture of the highest degree.
So you said that programming jobs being exported to India is a complete lie? Why?
It is true to some extent, but because remember the diagram I drew the first day or the second day, the first week, from the identification of a potential project to do, to feasibility study, to requirements, to analysis, requirements, and so on and so forth. It is a very, very treacherous process. When you have people from India doing a project, it requires that you truly understand your requirements, all right? And it also requires that you can state your requirements in such a way that there can be no ambiguity. And now, a lot of times, these coders, programmers from India, they're so far detached from what's happening in your company, right? Every company is different. Every application is different. There are little things that can easily throw you off course. So, I mean, it can become a very costly process. And actually, the largest software company in India moved to Atlanta. They know that they couldn't do it long distance. I mean, some of the projects could be done like this, but many, I would say, often cannot be done remotely. When you do it in 320, I don't know how many of you are in 320. If you're in 320, you're in the design stage. You have to talk to the clients. How many questions do you have, right? Like, lots and lots of questions. What do you do? So, and also, the gap between developed countries, you're going to see that, all right? And emerging economies are being closed. Okay. So, for example, wages in China are rising about 10-15% a year. And before long, right, it won't be very profitable to do stuff in China anymore. GE actually has moved back some of its operations from China specifically, because they see that happening. As the country gets richer, right, its workers are going to demand a higher wage. See? So this is these dynamics are really, really interesting. You're living in an age where big changes are taking place. It's no longer to be an absolute superpower like today. The U.S. is still the absolute superpower, right? But it's slowly changing so that it's going to be a multidimensional structure where I don't think Russia and China can replace the U.S. anytime soon, meaning in the next 10, 20 years. But Chinese economy at the current rate will surpass the U.S. in about 15 years or so, 20 years. What does it mean? It means that you're going to export to China much more often, right? As opposed to other countries. Because they're going to buy more stuff. India, but forget that. India is growing fast too, because they have room to grow. But here in the U.S., we have such a huge inventory of everything, housing, for example. We don't have as much room to grow. We just want to recover, right? We just want to stay healthy. So you need to be aware of those things, trends, and so you can make informed decisions for yourself. Don't trust the media. So this is a ERD. Let's take a look at ERD. It's a relational diagram for the invoicing system. And here, of course, you take a look at this. Can someone describe to me what's being conveyed by this ERD in terms of business rules? Jess.
A customer has one customer code, but a customer might have one or many invoices, and each invoice relates to one customer.
Okay. It's good so far.
One invoice may have many. I don't know what that line means. The line represents. Wait, many lines represent one invoice.
Each line.
Each line has one invoice. And then many lines have one product, and then each one product may have many lines.
It's all right. But you want to be more prepared for the test. When I gave you a diagram like this, say, please list the business rules, right, in each of the relationships. So what would you do in this case is you want to say that, of course, I'll give you a Visio diagram, not an access diagram. Access is not going to be on the test other than showing you a table of access, for example. And you're going to say, of course, that each customer may have one or more invoices, and each invoice is written for one or more customer. Right? And then we capture that. And then you would say each invoice may contain one or more line items. Right? Each line item is associated with one or more items. And then you're going to say each line item is associated with one product, and each product may appear in multiple line items. Something to that effect. And of course, this also has to do with the fact that there are business rules that you may not be familiar with, Jess, and that they can expect you to. So I probably will give you an ERD in the domain that you are familiar with, okay, such as school. And all right, so this is a very typical way of capturing invoices. Of course, the actual system is much more complicated, but basic idea is still the same, right? When you say college of business, when it buys machines, like for the lab, it will buy in the same invoice. It will have multiple machines, right? And then, of course, also it will have other things. I don't know what would you find in the lab, such as computers, mouse, right? So on and so forth. So each invoice may have, say, 5. Where's the one of units? May have 5 Dells, all right, and then 5 something else like printers, 5 printers, and then of course each will have a unit price, which may be different from the product price, right? Because it's on sale, and so on and so forth. So that's how you capture it. But that's what you're going to see on the test. You're going to see this, and you're going to produce the business rules. And you should feel very comfortable doing this so that you can do it quickly. Indices, we're not going to do indices much in this class other than working with the primary key index and the foreign key index. Now, the primary key is an index. You know what an index is, right? You have an index at the end of the book. It's to allow you to look up things very quickly. That's what an index is. And so the primary key is automatically an index. For example, you can search by primary key. And those are in 200. Have you reached searching yet? You have not reached searching. But search is a very, very important operation, right? Say you want to, you go to register for a class. What do? You enter your student ID, do you? I don't know. What's the identifier? How does the system know that it's you?
Just your username.
Username? Okay, so you log in to Ulink, yes. So when you log into Ulink, of course, they have to find you, right? To see if your credentials are correct, the password is correct, matches the username. And so that's a search. And just imagine how often that operation takes place, right? For U of L, for example, students are always logging in and logging off, right? And for Amazon, right? And for UPS, I mean, they send millions of packages a day, and people are logging in to see where the package is, right? They want to track it. So search is a very, very important operation. And you don't want to do sequential search. You know what sequential search is, right? So if you have, say, for example, 1 million items, if you do a sequential search, the average number of comparisons is what? 500,000, right? 500,000. That's the average. In the worst case, it's 1 million. Now, let's say 500,000, and you have about 15 million searches, every hour. You just imagine, right? The kind of toll it would take on the system if it's like that. It's usually much, much better. In fact, the indices in databases are built using a structure called, one of the most common index structures called B plus tree. In the B plus tree, this may be amazing to you, you can find an item in a collection of 1 million items by doing, at most, one comparison. Right? That's really amazing. I used to have my students program in plus trees until I received threats to my life. So I stopped doing that. But that's the ultimate experience in programming. I mean, it's really exhilarating. Okay, and you can go online and look at the code, and it's massively recursive. It's just that an experience that I think that would fundamentally change it. Right? Like one of those sermons you listen to that changes your life. It's like that. It's much longer lasting. Even better than girlfriends. So, coming back to this, we're not going to do a lot on indices. But we will talk about them. Hash tables and so on and so forth. So, Cod published a list of rules to define a relational database, and they're still very much true today. So you can read those rules in the chapter. So tables are basic unit, relationships are basic unit, and these concepts you all must understand really well to do the test. Any questions? Moving to chapter 4. It's not going to be on the test now. In chapter 4, we get seriously into modeling, database modeling. And by the end of chapter 4, you will know most of the basic constructs for modeling and know how to use them to reflect or to capture the given business rules. And in chapter 5, we go a little beyond that by looking at the more advanced or extended database modeling constructs. Right. Now, I want you to understand the difficulty of doing something described in chapter 4. We essentially have a set of business operations that you want to capture, right? So usually an information system attempts to automate a set of business processes, right? A business process could be as simple as going online and allowing a student to register for classes online. That could be a business process. And it could be much more complicated, like the company I once worked for wants to, it's a telecommunications company. I actually saw the DBA of the company last night. And the company has about $200 million in revenue a year. And what they do is, you know, these large telecommunication companies like AT&T and so on and so forth, they have access capacity, okay? So if the capacity is not used, they're simply wasted. So they would send out bids to these smaller players, say, hey, do you want to use this excess capacity I have there that's at this time period, right? But I know they're going to be there, and I can guarantee that. And they don't want to be in the business of doing that because then it would require resources and just a hassle for larger companies. They want to focus on their core business. So there are these smaller companies that would try to bid for those capacities and then package them so that they can be sold to small businesses like lawyer firms, like smaller legal firms, smaller businesses, like Paul Foods, for example, so that they can use these telecommunication services. They have a lot of customers here in Louisville and Kentucky. And so that entire process is automated. In other words, the program that goes out to AT&T to search for bids, and then using the information, pricing, coming back, packaging deals, and sending them to their clients. That entire process is automated. So you can do that at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Lawyers don't sleep anyway. So that is an example of a complicated business operation. But whatever it is, that's what you have to do. Now, when you're humans, right, there's a lot of inefficiency, but also there's we humans are comfortable with redundancy, right? When we say things, we usually repeat things, especially if it's face-to-face communication. You can look at the person, right? Look them in the eye, right? And see if they're lying to you. You can tell, usually. So, but with computer information systems, then you have to capture all of that. And so first of all, you have to talk to the end users, and they have to describe the business rules to you. Now, their representation, their knowledge is not perfect. Fidelity is going to be lost, right? So what they tell you is not going to be really what they do. And your understanding of that is going to be flawed because you're not paying full attention. Even if you were paying full attention, you couldn't understand completely because in communication, information can get lost, right? And then representation, you're using very, very crude constructs like what we're going to do in Chapter 4. And so it's a process that allows you to make mistake just about anywhere, anytime. So it is a very difficult process. So that's why if you really want to be a good database modeler, you have to know the domain. You have to know the business. As I have said, every time I do a project, I spend about 50% of my time understanding the business. If you don't understand the business, you can't do it. There's just no way. And so the best, but it's very difficult for a business person to understand technology to the degree that you guys would be able to use the technology to implement it. So, but it's relatively easier, I should say, for the CIS person to understand a particular business domain, right? If you work in human resource for a long time, you can understand a lot of it because these are rules created by humans to be carried out by humans, right? So it's relatively easy to understand those rules. But this computer rules, computer constraints, they're difficult because computers cannot think or operate like humans. So what we're going to do in this chapter with that in mind is entity relationship modeling. Okay. So what's an entity? An entity is a table. What's a relationship? A relationship is, of course, what connects these tables, right? As we said, a relational database is a collection of tables and the relationships between these tables. So you have entities. By this time, you know what they are. Attributes. You know what an attribute is, right? Field, like name, phone number, and relationships. So an entity refers to a collection of records, and they correspond to tables. And we, of course, will be using the crowsfoot format, and you know what they look like. And they're usually nouns in capital letters and in singular form. Singular nouns, like student, even though it's used to denote a table of students or a collection of students. Usually, right? It doesn't have to be the case. In some companies, you may see table names as plural nouns. Attributes, of course, having been through C# 199, you know what an attribute is, right? So there's no need to go through that. And so this is a simple example without the primary key, of course, in this case. And you have required attributes, optional attributes. We know all of that. And you have primary keys, also called identifiers, unique identifiers. And you have composite primary keys, composite foreign keys. Any of these concepts, I'm going through this assuming that you're familiar with the concepts. So I didn't dwell on any of those, but I may be wrong. Any questions? Did you receive my email?
Yes.
Okay. No question? proceed? Okay. You don't have to feign interest, okay? If you're tired, take a nap, close your eyes. I totally understand. If you want to chat with someone, if you want to chuckle, you have to keep it low. If you see something funny on the internet. I have no rules against those things. It's your time, it's your money, it's your life. You do whatever you want. Okay. But I also have to do what I need to do, which is to give you a fair grade. Hopefully all A's in this class. This is a class table, and class code, of course, is the unique identifier, and the rest of the attributes are fairly obvious. So we have now. This is where we're going to get into concepts and topics that we haven't covered before. You know what a composite attribute is, right? Like name. We talked about that in chapter 1. It can be divided into first name, last name, middle initial. And so usually in the very first initial design stage, you may keep attributes as composite attributes simply because it's simpler, right? It's simpler to write name. I mean, you know later on, of course, you need to divide it into 3 fields. But at the beginning, it's much easier if you can keep things together. So, for example, the Louisville Water Company, they have an Oracle database. You know how many tables they have? Each table is the size of my thumb. A little larger, probably. About an inch wide and 5 inches long. Right? The database, when printed, takes up almost the entire board. That's how many tables you have. So, if you're designing a database that big, you usually want to start initially, right? At a very abstract level, including, of course, using composite name attributes, so that you're not going to be bothered with details. And single valued attribute is where an attribute only has one value. For example, name is almost always a single value attribute, right? You have one name. One of you have more than one name? I watched the Lord of War on Nicolas Cage last night, and he has a lot of names because he's trafficking weapons illegally. So you have to have a lot of names. But most of us have just one name. And at least as a student, we know that you only have to give us one name. But so that's an example of a single valued attribute. But multi-value attributes could be different. It's an attribute that may have multiple values. Like I teach in the MBA program. And many of the MBA students, almost every class, I have 1 or 2 medical doctors, right? So there's an attribute called previous degree. And how do you represent that? Right? Previous degree. Previous degree, in the case of a doctor, usually there are at least 2 previous degrees, right? 1 undergraduate and 1 medical degree. And then he's coming back, or she's coming back for a medical degree, for a MBA. And because they find out being the head of a hospital makes more money. And so that is an example of a multi-value attribute. We will develop that so that you can see. Here. Here's a different example. You have a car, right? And it has attributes such as model code, which is a single valued attribute. Would you agree? Right? What's model? Like what? Like Camry? That's what I drive, Camry. And that car never gets me a problem. And I used to drive a Marquis. Always. Something breaks every day. but the GM, of course, has support. But GM, anyway, the earnings report indicated that they have now become, again, the number one automobile. So GM is looking at that. At least last night, I think he was talking about GM, right, in that commercial. So, but the color is a multi-value attribute. My lowly Camry has only one color, but I know that there are cars that have striped colors, or even the Camry may have different colors because the interior is different from the exterior, right? Seat covers may have a color, so that's what they meant. We're going to use a different example. I'm going to use the previous degree example because I actually built a database for the College of Business. So you have a student. Let me call it an MBA student. So you know that this is real. You have student ID. That's the primary key. Student name, I'm going to use a composite attribute so that it's easier. And then you're going to have other fields as well. Now, previous degree. How do you represent that? Previous degree is a multi-value attribute. Do you all agree? Can you all see that? If not, let's talk about it. Do you agree that previous degree is a multi-value attribute? And if you agree, give me an example and your thoughts on how it might be represented.
Do undergraduate, what was that called? Postgraduate degrees.
Okay. So you can do so you almost always have to have a previous degree table. Okay, you have to have a previous degree table. In that, each previous degree is going to have a previous degree ID and previous degree name, okay, and the rest of it. Now, we're really simplifying things. Let's just say we have different previous degrees so that you have associate. Okay. Undergraduate. Right? And you have MD. And you have MS. And you have MA, Master of Arts, right? And you, for example, you have PhD. And these are some of the common ones, right? Previous degrees. And of course, usually, when I designed a database for the college business, I actually included a lot more information, which ended up, for the degrees information, ended up using quite a few tables. Because there's majors, there's schools, and things like that that we need to capture. But let's just say we're interested in this. So given this, and we have some students like 1, 2, and 3, and names such as A, B, and C, right? So what kind of relationship do you think exists between MBA student and previous degree?
Many.
Many, many? Can you say why? Why it's many, many?
The student can have many degrees, and each degree can have many students.
So a student may have obtained many previous degrees, right? And the same previous degree may have been obtained by many students. You with me on that? All of you? So you have to, what do you think the appropriate name for the paper?
Background or history? Previous education. Previous education.
Previous education, or just education, right? You see, I mean, this is a clear demonstration of the effect of Pepsi. I mean, my ability to think is greatly compromised today. But education is really great. That's a great name. Okay. So now, you would have student ID and degree ID together making up the composite primary key for the education or background table, which is a group table. And maybe you're going to have something like a year acquired, something like that, as an attribute which only is relevant, of course, in that context, right? So the year degrees acquired. So you can say number one has, of course, undergraduate degree. Number one has, for example, an MD. Number one has an MS. And number one has a PhD. Now, I'm not making this up, all right? No, I'm going to write, excuse me, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's number one has 6. That was one of my teachers. I took computer design, which is a hardware class. I was a student. And so my professor, of course, had an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, a master's degree in electrical engineering, a PhD in electrical engineering. No, this, I'm sorry. PhD in electrical engineering. And while he was teaching the first few years, he went and acquired an MD because he thought he wanted to be a doctor. And then he decided no. After he has gotten the degree, he came back to electrical engineering to his first love, which is good for us. That was great. But yeah, he had one nasty habit. The class was at 8 o'clock in the morning, and 2 or 3 minutes before the class started, he would lock the door. Right? So if you're late, you have to knock on the door. It's really a very embarrassing thing to do for a student. So we all made a point of not being late. And he was very, very abusive in class. No respect for students. So is this clear? So this, as you can see, one little thing, right? A multi-valued attribute. Just one little thing. In the initial design stage, you simply might write down previous degree. That's all you might want to do, right? To indicate, hey, we're capturing that. But later on in the design process, you found out that that had to be turned into 2 additional tables, just like that. That's not uncommon. No questions? Okay. I'll see you.